May 1945. The war is ending, but things are super messy, especially in the Austrian Alps. Two groups of soldiers, supposed to be enemies, are about to come face to face. One is wearing American gear, the other, German field gray. Their guys are ready to go, fingers on the triggers. Nobody trusts anybody. But then, something wild happens. A handshake. A Texas tank commander and a German major, who just days before were trying to blow each other up, decide to team up. Sounds crazy, right? What led to this incredibly strange alliance, and how did it end up saving some of the most important prisoners in Europe? Stick around, because this story is wild. So picture this. It's the 4th of May, 1945. We're on a forest road deep in the Austrian Alps. And right there, in front of each other, stand two men. One's got on the familiar olive drab of the American army. The other, he's in the gray uniform of Germany. Behind them, their soldiers are watching, tense, with their fingers practically on the triggers. You could cut the distrust with a knife. But then the American, Captain John Lee, he's 34, straight out of Texas, commanding a tank outfit. He's the one who extends his hand first. The German, Major Joseph Gengel, he hesitates for just a second. Think about it. Just 3 days before this very moment, they were literally trying to destroy each other. And now, this American wants to shake his hand. Gengel takes it. And that single handshake, it marks the beginning of one of the absolute strangest partnerships of World War II. What's going to happen next is truly unbelievable. The very next day, these two men, American soldiers and German soldiers, will be fighting side by side. Their mission, to defend a medieval castle against the SS. They'll be protecting French prisoners, important folks, from being executed by fanatical Nazi soldiers. But right at this moment, standing on this quiet forest road, neither of them has a clue what's coming. All they really know is one thing. The war is almost over, and the lines of who's who to trust, have never felt more blurry.
Some powerful figures wanted them silenced, permanently. The SS guards at Castle Itter received new orders. If the Americans got close, they were to execute everyone, leave no one alive to tell the tale. Now the prisoners, they didn't know about these specific orders, but they absolutely knew the war was ending. They had a hidden radio in the castle, and they were listening to the BBC. Those broadcasts were telling them that the Allies were closing in. American tanks were already rolling through Bavaria. Freedom felt so close they could practically taste it. Then, on May 4th, something strange happened. The guards just disappeared. The SS abandoned Castle Itter without a word. One morning, the watchtowers were simply empty. The gates were unlocked. The prisoners woke up to a silence where German voices used to be. For a fleeting moment, it felt like liberation, but then reality hit hard. They were free inside the castle, yes, but outside, the roads were crawling with fanatical Waffen-SS units. These were soldiers who knew the war was lost, but they absolutely refused to stop fighting. They were like death squads hunting down deserters, patrol groups that would execute anyone who looked like they might surrender. The prisoners were trapped, caught between freedom and murder. The very castle walls that had held them captive for so long were now the only thing keeping them alive. Someone needed to go for help. Someone needed to reach the Americans before the SS came back. But who would be crazy enough to walk through territory controlled by the SS in the very last days of a collapsing Reich? The prisoners gathered in the castle's main hall. You had former prime ministers, generals, a tennis champion, the sister of Charles de Gaulle.
These were people who had survived 4 years of captivity. Now they might die in the last week of the war. Someone had to reach the Americans. Someone had to bring help before the SS returned. But who? Paul Renaud was 66 years old. He had a very recognizable face. If any German soldier had stopped him, he'd have been executed on the spot, or worse, dragged back to Berlin as some kind of trophy. General Wehrmacht was 78. He could barely walk the castle corridors, let alone cross mountains. The other prisoners had the same problem. They were old, they were weak from years of being locked up, and every SS soldier in Austria knew their faces from propaganda posters. Then, someone mentioned the Yugoslav. Zvonimir Kukovic was standing in the corner of the room. He was only 22 years old, a forced laborer. The Nazis had grabbed him from his village 2 years ago and put him to work as a handyman at Castle Itter. He fixed things, cleaned things, became invisible, like servants often do. He was perfect for the job, not just because he was brave, though he was, but because he was nobody. Kukovic wore civilian clothes, not prison stripes. He had no papers marking him as a VIP prisoner. If a German patrol stopped him, he'd just look like another refugee on the road, another displaced worker trying to escape the chaos. The SS wasn't exactly hunting Yugoslav handymen. Plus, he knew the land. 2 years of fetching supplies from the village, 2 years of walking these mountain paths. He'd seen the checkpoints, he knew which roads to avoid. The prisoners looked at him. Renaud asked if he was willing to try. Kukovic didn't hesitate. He nodded. They quickly wrote a message on a scrap of paper. Broken French, broken German. The words themselves barely mattered. What mattered was making the Americans understand. It said something like, "Important French prisoners at Castle Itter. Need rescue. SS threat." Kukovic tucked the paper into his shirt, walked to the gate, looked back once, and then started down the mountain. While the prisoners watched him disappear into the forest, nobody noticed the castle cook slipping out through the kitchen door. Andreas Kronberger had his own plan, and he wasn't asking anyone's permission. Kronberger was 50 years old, Austrian, born in these very mountains. He'd been cooking for the castle since the Nazis turned it into a prison. Every week he walked to the village market for supplies. Every week he talked to farmers, shopkeepers, local folks who would whisper about what was really happening in the war. And that's how he knew about Major Joseph Gangl. The prisoners had never even heard the name.
They didn't know about this German officer in the area who had been hiding deserters from the SS. They didn't know about his secret meetings with the Austrian resistance. They didn't know that not every man in a Wehrmacht uniform wanted to die for Hitler. But Kronberger knew. The village talked, and Kronberger listened. He didn't tell the French prisoners about his plan. What would he even say? That he was going to find a German officer and ask him to commit treason? That he was betting their lives on village rumors? He figured it was better to just go. If he was wrong, he'd be the only one who died. Kronberger took the back path towards the village, about 3 kilometers through the valley. He knew every farmhouse, every barn, every shortcut. This was his home. These were his people. He found Gangl in a farmhouse just outside town. The major was sitting at a wooden table, studying maps with 2 of his officers. He was 35 years old, a career soldier, an iron cross on his chest, but his eyes were tired. 3 weeks of watching the Reich collapse. 3 weeks of trying to keep his men alive, while SS death squads were executing anyone who even talked about surrender. Kronberger told him everything. The French prisoners, the abandoned guards, the SS patrols circling the castle like wolves. Gangl listened without interrupting. When the cook finished, the major asked 3 crucial questions. How many prisoners? How many ways out of the castle? And how much time do we have? Kronberger answered as best he could. Gangl stood up, folded the map, and looked at his officers. He'd already made his decision. Maybe he'd made it weeks ago when he started hiding deserters. Maybe he'd made it years ago when he first realized what kind of war he was actually fighting. He was going to find the Americans. He was going to propose something absolutely insane, a joint operation, enemies fighting together. And if they said yes, he was going to lead German soldiers into battle against other Germans to save French prisoners in a medieval castle just 3 days before the war officially ended. But first, he needed to convince a Texas tank commander that a German officer could actually be trusted. Meanwhile, Kukovic was still running. For 3 hours he moved through terrain that could kill him with every single step. SS patrols were everywhere. Checkpoints blocked the main roads. Any German soldier could shoot him as a runaway or a spy.
He stayed off the roads, cut through forests, crossed streams, climbed over ridges that probably shouldn't be climbed. His hands were bleeding from grabbing rocks, his legs burned from the endless descent. Twice he heard German voices and dropped flat into the undergrowth. He'd wait, breathe, and then move again. By the afternoon, he stumbled into American lines near Innsbruck, an outpost of the 103rd Infantry Division. The soldiers there had no idea what to make of this filthy, exhausted young man waving a piece of paper and shouting about French generals in a castle. They sent him up the chain of command. The message eventually reached Captain John Lee. 2 messengers, 2 different paths, 1 castle. Neither knew about the other. Neither knew if their mission would succeed. But somewhere in the Austrian Alps, an American captain was about to receive the strangest request of the war, and a German major was about to bet everything on a handshake. The meeting happened on a Forst's die at German hands, and now a German major wanted to chat. Lee could have shot Gangl on sight. Nobody would have blamed him. The war wasn't technically over yet. Instead, he listened. Gangl explained the situation. Important French prisoners in a castle. SS death squads in the area. The guards had abandoned the prison, but they could come back any moment with orders to execute everyone. Lee asked the obvious question, "Why should I trust you?" Gangl had an answer. He'd already committed treason against the Reich. He was already working with the Austrian resistance. He was already hiding German deserters from the SS. He had nothing left to lose. And he had something to offer. Local knowledge, maps of the roads, intelligence on SS positions, and a handful of German soldiers who would fight alongside Americans against their own countrymen.
Lee thought about it. The smart move would be to wait for reinforcements, call in the whole regiment, approach with overwhelming force. But that would take time, and time was exactly what those prisoners didn't have. So Lee made a choice. He was going in tonight. A small team, 1 tank, whatever men Gangl could bring, fast and quiet, before the SS realized what was happening. They shook hands, American and German officers planning together for the first time. The convoy formed at dusk, 1 tank, 24 soldiers who were killing each other just a week ago. Their target, a castle full of French VIPs. Their obstacle, an entire region controlled by SS death squads. The questions nobody was answering. Would the convoy even make it to the castle? Could Americans and Germans actually fight side by side? And what happens if the SS finds them before they're ready? 1 American tank and a handful of soldiers just formed an alliance with their enemy. Now they're driving straight into SS-controlled territory to rescue prisoners they've never met. Captain Lee's Sherman tank led the convoy up the mountain road. Behind it, the strangest assault force of the war. 14 American GIs sitting alongside a dozen German Wehrmacht troops. Nobody talked. 3 years of killing each other doesn't just disappear with a handshake. Gangl rode in a Cuba wagon with his men. He'd removed his Nazi insignia, but he was still wearing Wehrmacht gray. If they hit an SS checkpoint, he was dead either way, shot as a traitor by Germans or as an enemy by Americans who didn't know the plan. The convoy stopped twice. First, a fallen tree blocked the road, 20 minutes to clear it while everyone listened for approaching vehicles. Second, they heard engines in the distance. Everyone froze. An SS patrol, maybe. The sound faded. They kept moving. By midnight, Castle Itter appeared on its cliff. Stone walls, medieval towers, 1 narrow road leading up. Lee studied it through his binoculars. No lights, no movement, either abandoned or waiting. Gangl volunteered to go first. He knew the castle layout, and if there were still guards inside, a German officer might get close enough to talk before they started shooting. He took 1 soldier and walked the last kilometer in the darkness. At the gate, he called out in German, announced himself. The gate opened. Paul Reynaud stepped out, the former Prime Minister of France, a prisoner for 4 years, now standing face to face with a German officer claiming he was here to help. Reynaud asked 1 question. Where are the Americans coming? Gangl said, right behind me. Within the hour, Lee's Sherman rumbled through the castle gate. American soldiers poured into the courtyard. The French prisoners emerged, thin, exhausted, but alive. For a moment, it felt like mission accomplished. The rescue was complete. Everyone could go home. Then someone checked the time. It was 4 a.m. Think about what had just happened. American and German soldiers had just driven through enemy territory to rescue French prisoners in a castle. Against all odds, they made it. Everyone was alive. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong, because in 2 hours the sun would come up.
And when it did, every SS patrol in the area would see an American tank sitting on top of a mountain. They'd know exactly where to find them, and there would be no way out. Before we see what happens at dawn, if you're enjoying this story and finding it as incredible as I am, please consider subscribing. It really helps our channel keep making videos like this. Now, let's see how this impossible battle unfolds. May 5th, 1945, 6:30 a.m. The sun rises over the Alps, and the first bullet smashes into the castle wall. Then another, and another. The SS had found them. Lee yelled for everyone to take cover. The defenders scrambled to positions along the battlements. Gangel grabbed a rifle and ran for the main gate. From the tree line, about 200 meters away, muzzle flashes sparked in the morning light. Nobody knew exactly how many attackers there were. Later estimates would range from 100 to 200 Waffen-SS troops. What everyone knew right then was that they were badly outnumbered. Lee had 14 Americans, a dozen Germans, and 1 tank. They were trapped in a narrow courtyard with no room to maneuver and limited firing angles. The defenders split up. Americans took the north wall, Germans took the east, and the French prisoners, the politicians and generals who hadn't held weapons in years, picked up rifles and joined the fight.
General Maxime Weygand, 78 years old, took a position at a second-floor window. He had commanded armies when these SS soldiers were children. Now he was an infantry rifleman again. Paul Reynaud refused to hide. He moved between positions, encouraging the defenders, completely exposed to enemy fire. The Sherman fired its main gun. The blast shook the walls. Trees exploded in the forest. For a moment, the SS gunfire slowed. Then it came back, heavier. The attackers were probing for weak points, testing the defenses, waiting for the right moment to rush the walls. Lee knew the math. Limited ammunition. The SS could shoot all day. Eventually, something would break. He sent a runner, a young American named Eric Luton. His mission: find the 142nd Infantry Regiment. Tell them what's happening. Bring reinforcements. Luton slipped out through a side gate and ran down the mountain, with bullets snapping through the trees around him. But reinforcements were hours away. The defenders had to hold. By mid-morning, the situation was falling apart. The Sherman took a hit. Not destroyed, but damaged enough that its gun could barely move. It was still firing, but it was crippled. Ammunition was running low. Several men were wounded. The SS kept pouring fire into the castle. Then, Gangel saw it. Paul Reynaud standing at a window, completely exposed. In the tree line, an SS sniper adjusted his scope, lined up the shot. Gangel didn't think. He ran. The sniper's finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle cracked. And in that split second, everything changed. But what happened next would turn this battle into something no one expected. The bullet hit Joseph Gangel. He fell instantly. The German major was dead. The shot meant for Paul Reynaud had found him instead. For a moment, everything stopped. Americans froze. Germans froze. French prisoners stared in disbelief. A Wehrmacht officer had just died saving a French politician. A man who wore the enemy's uniform had given his life for someone he was supposed to hate. Paul Reynaud dropped to his knees beside Gangel's body. His hands shook. 4 years ago, men in that same gray uniform had dragged him from his home, thrown him in chains, made him a prisoner. Now, one of them was dead because he chose to save Reynaud's life. There was no time to grieve. The SS assault intensified. More troops pushed toward the walls. The defenders were running out of ammunition. Gangel's German soldiers, now without their commander, fought with renewed fury, not for survival, but for the man who had just proved that not everyone in a Wehrmacht uniform was a monster. 2 more defenders fell wounded. Ammunition was nearly gone. The SS kept coming. Then someone screamed, "Vehicles!" Everyone froze. More SS? A second wave? Lee raised his binoculars. His hands shook. American trucks. American tanks. The 142nd Infantry Regiment, charging up the mountain. Luton had made it. The SS saw them too. Caught between the castle and fresh American armor, the assault collapsed. Some fled into the forest, others surrendered. The rest were cut down. By noon, it was over. Castle Itter was free. The French prisoners walked into the sunlight, truly free for the first time in 4 years. The strangest battle of World War II had ended. The cost: several defenders wounded, 1 man killed. Major Joseph Gangel, age 35. Wehrmacht officer, traitor to the Third Reich, hero to the people he saved. Sometimes the uniform doesn't define the man.
Sometimes one person's choice to do the right thing, even when it cost everything, changes history. Joseph Gangl made that choice. On May 5, 1945, in a medieval castle in the Austrian Alps, enemies stopped being enemies, not just because the war ended, but because one man decided that saving lives mattered more than following orders. Wow, what a story, right? It just goes to show you that even in the darkest times, incredible acts of courage and humanity can shine through. If you found this tale as gripping as I did, please do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you want to hear more amazing stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Ethereal Bygoner. We'd love to have you join our community.